All right, hello POSAC. I am Susan Spaulding and my title is Environmental Resources Senior Specialist. So the environmental resources part of my title ties back to the Boulder County Comp Plan, environmental resources element, which emphasizes the importance of habitat connectivity as well as multi-jurisdictional coordination. So this project is a key component of that, and I'll be going over the project's evolution to this point. Okay, so I am going to explain why US 36 between Boulder and Lyons is being prioritized by Boulder County for wildlife crossings. And also how we're working with several partners, including of course CDOT, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the town of Lyons, but also very importantly, Boulder County's Community Planning and Permitting Department, especially in relation to the US 36 North Foothills Bikeway feasibility study. But also CPP has the expertise in navigating how to work with CDOT, which is key. Okay, so why are wildlife crossings important? So if you want to raise your hands, how many of you have seen roadkill?
Tonight.
Yeah, how many of you have hit an animal yourselves? And how many of you have needed to submit an insurance claim because of those collisions? Yeah, so hold on to that thought. So now try to think through the lens of a wild animal. Put yourself in their shoes or paws or hooves, and how do you even understand the concept of a road or the unpredictability of traffic or the blinding lights coming at you at inconceivable speeds? So terrifying and confusing, right? So on the wildlife side of things, we know roads are extremely deadly. They decrease habitat amount and quality. They prevent access to critical food and migration routes, and they subdivide animal populations leading to genetic isolation, and these are all bad things. Okay, so now going back to the human side of things, it is estimated that between 1 and 2 million collisions with large animals occur in the US every year, and that's reported by State Farm due to insurance claims. So these collisions result in animals being killed and of course humans being injured or killed, and property damage, and all of that costs about $10 billion a year in the US. So right here in Colorado, again, according to State Farm, as of 2021, between July 2020 and June 2021, one out of 179 Colorado drivers submitted a claim from hitting an animal. So just to clarify, these numbers are based on insurance claims, as we've discussed, but many small animals get hit but are not reported. So anyway, these are pretty staggering numbers. Okay, so more on small animals. So wildlife crossings benefit species of all sizes. We tend to focus on the large animals because they more directly result in human impacts. But we are planning with our project on US 36 to incorporate all wildlife, including aquatic or semi-aquatic organisms. And other crossing projects in North America have documented species such as garter snakes, painted turtles, marmots, boreal toads, badgers, and even beavers using them. And this will be our goal as well. And not to mention that we have Preble's meadow jumping mouse in this corridor too, so maybe we can just help even the littlest of animals. Okay, so why now? Why is our project more of a reality now? In 2022, CDOT and Colorado Parks and Wildlife finished an analysis of all highways for wildlife vehicle collisions in regions 1, 2, and 4 in the Eastern Slopes and Plains Wildlife Prioritization Study. So the modeling done for the analysis included vehicle collisions as a percentage of the focus species populations, which were elk, deer, pronghorn, lynx, and bighorn, migration routes, winter concentration areas, traffic volumes and speed, both current and predicted, and of course, collision rates overall. So this report provides critical tools for land managers, including high-level mitigation recommendations for the top 5% rated priority segments as identified through this modeling. And the report includes a decision support framework, including a benefit cost tool, an implementation analysis matrix, and guidance for integration into CDOT's transportation and planning process. So it's not just a report, it's a comprehensive planning tool for land managers. And the release of this report provides background and justification for us to move our project forward. Okay, so for quick reference, these are the CDOT regions. So again, the study analyzed regions 1, 4, and 2. And just to mention, the western slopes, or regions 3 and 5, already has a prioritization study that's been completed. So that was before ours. And so that's good for Colorado, right? And it's in large part due to our governor's emphasis on habitat connectivity. Governor Polis issued an executive order in 2019 titled Conserving Colorado's Big Game Winter Range and Migration Corridors. And since then, the state has also allocated significant funding to serve as matches for federal grants, which are coming our way, that are specifically targeted for wildlife crossings, which I'll mention later. So also, by the way, for context, CDOT Region 4 is responsible for 6,500 highway lane miles. And that's just Region 4. Okay, so how did we rank in the Eastern Slope and Plains analysis? So our stretch is ranked in the top 5% of all highway segments and is ranked the highest in all of Region 4 as needing mitigations. So it's the most deadly stretch of highway in all of Region 4 for wildlife mortalities. So let's think about that for a minute. So to put some numbers to that, the data from CDOT for the past 10 years documented that 235 animals were hit and killed along this stretch, including 3 bears, 103 deer, 68 elk, 1 lion, and 53 smaller animals, including badgers, bobcats, prairie dogs, and foxes. And again, the unfortunate caveat to those numbers, as we've discussed already, is that wildlife collisions are up to 60% unreported. So we know these mortality numbers are much higher. Okay, so here's an overview of the areas specifically called out in the Eastern Slope and Plains study. So you see Nelson Road in the south, Hygiene up in the north. And so in these top 5% segments, the consultants actually assessed these areas in person on the ground. So they looked at existing infrastructure such as culverts that could be modified to accommodate underpasses. They also looked at the surrounding topography to support overpasses. So the purple stars you see here on the map show the potential locations of crossings. And I overlaid these areas onto our open space and conservation easement data to show land ownership in the corridor. And that's important because land security is one of the factors to be considered in making these projects a reality. Basically, you wouldn't want to construct a crossing in an area that could have development in the future. So once again, yay for open space.
I can't really tell those 2 light green colors apart. Oh, sorry. Susan, I can't tell those 2 light green colors apart.
So can you tell the darker and the lighter?
I can tell darker.
Okay, so the darker is our open space that's open, that's fee owned, and then the lighter is the conservation easements, if you can see that.
Okay.
And I can provide.
There's still easements either way.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely, private property conservation easements, yep. Okay, so I wanted to have a quick mention here of our very own Boulder County Transportation Master Plan update from 2022. And one of the metrics of the analysis that our county transportation division used was animal hits on all roads in the county. Again, you can see the section as being the most problematic in the county. And in fact, between 2009 and 2018, 40% of all the total animal hit collisions recorded occurred in this stretch. So again, Boulder County itself has confirmed these numbers and the importance of this stretch. Okay, so what steps are we taking to move our project from the high-level conceptual recommendations made in the report to actualization on the ground? So we literally just went under contract with consultants who have significant expertise in this realm. They are well-versed in using the tools provided in the East Slope and Plains study, including the benefit cost analysis automated tool. In fact, they are involved right now in the planning phases for the I-25 Raton Pass Wildlife Crossings feasibility study, as well as many others. So we're super excited to have them aboard. We're very much looking forward to working with them. And this is Benish and Pinion Environmental. Okay, so the objectives of working with the consultants are to assess the potential crossing locations and put together cost estimates. These cost estimates are important to then apply for federal funds through the federal infrastructure bill, which is funded at $350 million. The work done by the consultants will also incorporate leaving room for the potential future bikeway, and cost estimates will incorporate this inclusion. So as for the grant, we'd like to go for the entire amount needed, which will include full design, permitting, and construction. And if we're successful, funds won't be available till 2027, so that's a general idea of the time frame. And of course, this project has required close coordination with municipalities and partners all along the way to get to this point. And we will continue to work with stakeholders and the public very closely as we move forward. Okay, so along those lines, our website is up and running, and here's the address. It includes an email for signing up for updates, and plus eventually we'll have a public comment portal on the website. And it has lots of links to information about wildlife crossings in general and other good information. And we have an upcoming webinar on May 15th, which is going to be hosted by the Society for Ecological Restoration. And we're going to have it with Ben Goldfarb, who's the author of the book Crossings, How Road Ecology is Changing the Face of Our Planet, and Julia Kinch of Eco Resolutions, who co-authored both the Western and Eastern Slope Wildlife Prioritization Studies, and then me for a little blurb at the end about our project right here in Boulder County. Okay, so questions?
Thank you, Susan. Okay, do we have some questions from POSAC? Christine?
Christine Johnson Posack, I'm really glad you mentioned the book because I just read it. And along those lines, so my questions are actually informed by Goldfarb's book. I see that your crossings, that you've taken into consideration where we own land or have easements, but where does this align with migration of animals? Like, are those sites appropriate for migrating herds especially?
Yes, and part of what the consultants are going to do for us, and what we already know in-house as well, is that we know where they cross the roads. Now, those locations, they're not necessarily correlated to open space or the conservation easements. That's just where the potential locations based on existing infrastructure exist, or topography that would be conducive to overpasses. So that's that. But we're going to be looking at all sorts of data to inform sort of the high-level design of what it could look like, including fencing, including how far you run the fences, where do you tie them into topography, rocks, roads. There's a lot to talk about, and that's why we need to hire the experts to give us the best way to do it. And also, they will provide us with a prioritized, based on all that data, what's the best places for the crossings, number 1, 2, 3, 4. But that'll also be based on this decision matrix, which takes into account feasibility, cost. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are going to feed into that.
Thank you. Another question. So I'm not a wildlife biologist and I don't pretend to be one, but I'm aware that, as you mentioned, that there are multiple very different creatures who are impacted by this. Are you considering multiple crossings, for perhaps creatures who are smaller or moister?
Yeah, exactly. I love that, moisture, because it's true.
Lazy river, what are you looking for?
Well, no, because one thing that I learned is frogs can dry out and die in a poorly constructed culvert, and fish and other critters may need it as well.
We are definitely considering the smaller animals, including the aquatic and semi-aquatic. So there are culverts, there are underpasses. The underpasses need to be designed with, is it mule deer? Is it
Yeah.
maybe even elk, depending how big you make them. But also those smaller culverts, like a live bottom culvert for aquatic organisms might be in the mix. So again, we're gonna try to look at the thing holistically and how can we serve the most species? And also be realistic about what we can achieve for the amount of money we might have. Yeah.
Thank you.
Trace?
Yeah, Trace Baker, PostSec. Susan, thank you for a very informative presentation. My question is dealing with perhaps undesirable consequences of adding crossings, because there have been issues with, in particular, elk in that area getting onto farmlands, and whether adding a crossing would facilitate elk moving into areas where they're really not wanted.
I'm really glad you asked that question and made that point, because part of the RFP we have with the consultants is to look at the bigger picture east of US 36 for those exact reasons. But also remember, crossings are two-way streets, so they can easily cross both directions, so out of the east if that's where the issues are. So again, it's both directions. But we're gonna be looking with the consultants on how to figure out, we know where the elk are moving on the east side, but maybe there are fences we can modify, maybe there are fences we can take down or put higher fences up so we can start moving them around the landscape in a way that would maybe be less impactful to the landowners that are having an issue. So that's part of the RFP that the consultants are gonna be looking at. And I will say that we in-house have a lot of information about elk already. As you know, we've got our Red Hill Elk Management Plan. We've been keeping close track of where they are. So we're pretty well set up to actually address those issues.
Okay, very good to hear. Thank you.
Okay.
Carol, Jackson, anything? Paula?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Really good information and really good project. Two things. I saw a moose tangled in fencing on the east side of 36 last fall. And yeah, I was shocked. It's like,
Yeah.
a moose down here. But yeah, and so I'm wondering, okay, wildlife crossing, there's lots of little different it was just north of Boulder Valley Farms. There's lots of, farm fencing and stuff, and I presume you'll be looking at, okay, you get them across the road, that's one barrier, but getting tangled up in all these other fences and stuff is another hazard to them, and if that will be integrated into your study.
We can certainly look at that, absolutely. And, part of our open space program, the wildlife group, we remove fences a lot that are like down or tangled up. So that's something we always look at. So this is a good point. So we can,
Okay, and then the other question I have, and I'm not sure if I should just wait for the next item, is how this will integrate with the bikeway feasibility study.
Great question. So I will say, and Alexandra's up next, as you know, but we've been involved from the get-go with the bikeway study. They've known from the get-go that the wildlife crossings is a potential. And so basically, we're going to leave room for each other. And definitely in the RFP itself, it says we will accommodate the bikeway, the future potential bikeway. Basically, like I said, leaving room for the bikeway. And that'll be included in the cost estimates, because we might have to make a little bit of a longer overpass or a little bit of a longer underpass so the bikeway can go over. So
Okay,
working
good.
closely with CPP on that, yep.
Thank you.
Drew?
Drew Adams, POSAC. So I'm very appreciative that this is being looked at. I mean, I think about Highway 9 and the stretch between Kremling and Muddy Pass. And, in the early 90s, it felt like an apocalypse, because after, much of a season, you would go through there, through a ski season perhaps, and see just countless deer carcasses on the side of the road. And that's made a big difference, because there is an overpass there, and there is fencing that they put in. So I really appreciate it. I think it's a good move in the right direction. Maybe I missed it in the study. I was just trying to determine what's the time frame from study
to perhaps installation of the first crossing or underpass?
Great question. So we're on a really tight timeframe to get the sort of design with the consultants accomplished because we're trying to apply for the federal funds. It'll either be released mid-July or early August, we'll have to apply for the federal funds. Those federal funds, if we're successful, would not be available to us until 2027. So that's when the real business of design, and so then you'd have to design the corridor and then implementation after that. So it's a little bit of a ways out. Yep. I wanted to say too that studies have shown, like the Kremling overpasses, the area goes Highway 9, it's a 90% reduction in collisions.
No, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, I've driven that now multiple times since that happened, and you literally look around, you're like, where are the carcasses? They used to be, I mean, just littered on that road.
Yep, yeah.
Janet?
Well, I'd like to get in the weeds on this, but I won't, because you got somebody studying it. But thank you, I really appreciate the work that you're putting in, and it's great to see that this is getting somewhere, because this isn't a new problem on 36, this has been around for decades. And thank you for thinking of more than just the elk and deer, which are very visible when they get hit, but also thinking of the little critters. So I guess my question will be this, is how can we help as POSAC to maybe, or even as individuals, as you go down the road? Is there a way we can support it?
Yes, I think what I understand about these projects is, of course, we need the public involved at all levels and to advocate and to get the word out. And so I'm honestly thinking about, how do I get people involved? And in what manner? So yeah, we can keep noodling that and thinking about how that could work. Public outreach programs, maybe even patrolling the corridor and looking for carcasses. You know, we know that we miss a lot of carcasses on US 36. I know these numbers are underreported. These are all CDOT numbers of when they have to move something off the road, but we know that there's many more than that. I don't know, we could do a lot of thinking about it, but thank you for that. Yes, absolutely.
Derek?
Derek Turner, POSAC. Along those lines, I mean, what do you see as could slow it down, this project down, or hamper it? Is it, concerns about the construction impacts and commuting, neighbors? What are the difficult things
These
that
are
you
great
have to
questions, and I'm curious to know as well. I'm looking at it from a wildlife biologist lens, and so I think, well, the trade-offs are justifiable because not doing anything just doesn't seem like the right thing to do, both for wildlife and for humans. I think might be some issues with scenic impacts, depending on what's proposed. I think that Trace touched on, well, what if we don't want the wildlife on the east side of 36, which is, they're gonna go anyway. And then something about possibly the fencing, as far as how far along the corridor is it gonna go? Where do we tie it in? Because you can't fence off the entire wilderness from wildlife. So what does that look like? So these are the things that I've kind of thought about. And we'll see as we go, I guess. Yeah.
Thanks.
Christine?
Christine Johnson, POSAC. One final question, and this may be out of the scope of the project, but is speed reduction being considered in conjunction with this?
It could be something that is proposed. I will say that we did a trial on that a few years ago through CPW, and we put nighttime speed limits at 55 for a couple years and tried to figure out if it was helping. And what we determined is people tend to become blind to those signs after a short while. And so the speed limits don't really get reduced long-term, unfortunately. Yeah, but there are other aspects we can look at. And the consultants with their expertise, they'll have more ideas as well. But yeah, good question.
Trace?
Trace Baker, POSAC. Susan, you said that federal funds would not be available until 2027. And is that firm, or is that going to be subject to political whim, depending on who's, in control of the House and control of the White House? And if possible, are there other sources of funding you could pursue to make it happen faster or more securely?
Great questions. This is why we want to apply this year, for sure. We want to get this rolling and apply this year. There are other grants out there. America the Beautiful grant has some money, 50 million a year allocated for the next several years. I have a list of them. There's quite a bit. So we can look at a bunch of different to bring in, and we can apply to several sources. But it's a good point. It's a very good point.
Thank you.
Carol?
Carol Byerly, POSAC. I just want to add my voice to enthusiastic support of this. And as I said earlier, this is one of the reasons I'm here, is the wildlife. And we've taken so much, and we need to protect them. And so I join Janet's question of how can we help?
Excellent. So thank you.
Jackson, anything?
Outstanding project. Two thumbs up.
Thanks. Drew?
So just a couple, I guess, it's early in the process, so we clearly have to do the feasibility study and evaluate. But I was just thinking about the landowners in the cell, Janet's point of like, how can we help? And I'm envisioning the wildlife crossing that's north of Kremling, and clearly it's like BLM land, there's not a lot of property owners that are close by. So it doesn't really feel like that big of a burden on the landscape when you look at it as far as the aesthetic impact. But that type of bridge or overpass in that corridor would significantly be impacting that view. So it seems like an underpass would more than likely be an easier sell because you don't really see it as a driver, and then perhaps the landowners wouldn't have that same angle that to be able to be impacted in the same way. So I'm just thinking like right now, clearly the study's coming out that we're going to start looking at this. I wonder if preemptively we could start to work with the firm to say, let's look at perhaps underpasses in lieu of overpasses with the thought that in particular in those areas, it might be a higher level of resistance of having that kind of above ground eyesore. Because I think that's going to be the response. I'm an advocate for it, but I think those landowners, just thinking about Trace's point, like a farmer saying, now you've just increased the flow of elk to my land. And the reality is they're going to come anyway, regardless if there's a wildlife crossing, they're going to cross because they're hungry. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how we can market it in that way.
Right, so we've definitely thought about that, the scenic impacts, and there's some land use code that we'd have to be navigating. In my pie in the sky, I'm thinking, wouldn't Boulder County be proud of an overpass? Possibly. Underpasses are definitely, they work. They don't work for everybody, all the species, unless they're quite big and quite tall. So it's not impossible by any means, but if we are really looking at the big animals, we'll just have to think about, do underpasses serve all of them equally, or, so it's a good point. I don't want to give up on an overpass
Sure.
already, but it's a very good point. Yeah.
I'm just imagining, we had resistance to where a trailhead location was going to be, right? That it was going to be an eyesore across the street from my house or half a mile away from me or whatever it might be. This is a pretty big sell, I think, for some of those individuals that are sitting out there on, a couple dozens of acres of land that want to have that space, and some of those property owners that it might be hard. And I think, it'd be interesting to see what the study comes back to see what type of migration increases are on an overpass versus an underpass. Which species prefer one versus another? I'm sure all those studies are there to really be able to encourage it. And I'm with you as well. Like, it'd be great, big token for us to be able to say we have this wildlife corridor throughway that allows for the, a reduction of animal accidents. But it's not in my backyard. It's really far from my backyard, but I would support the development of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's one place that's being proposed for an overpass that has an overpass because of the topography and where the elk are crossing. And because of the topography, it actually makes a lot of sense. But now I'm thinking like, who would see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, these are good questions.
I mean, I'm picturing like right at the intersection of Hygiene Road and 36. There's even like a built-up berm. Is that the same spot you're considering?
Well, it's a little farther south than that, but yes, I know what you're talking about.
But, you know, the person in the Octagon House or whatever it is at the top
Oh,
of the
yeah,
hill would
right,
probably
right.
object because they clearly have some different views in the world.
Yeah,
But like that would be a perfect spot. It's already there. I mean, topography exists, but I don't know. It'll
I
be an
think-
interesting
yeah.
battle to see. I'm curious, but I want to support you on the efforts. I'm just wondering about how we could help offset some of that impact in the thinking.
yeah, absolutely. And I really think public outreach is so key for all of this. And this is the first kickoff for basically a major public outreach to the public. So we're rolling now.
Right.
And that's going to be a big part of it.
Right, so preemptively, what can we do right now to start
see,
to
yeah.
market that? Because
Yep.
there were no public comments about this.
Yeah,
So now maybe there will be, and we want to be able to offset that as best as we possibly can.
we are going to the town of Lyons with the bikeway on April 30th. So that will be possibly more folks in the room. So another opportunity to start asking the questions, getting perspectives. And then I will be following up with some more public meetings like at our offices and inviting folks in. We're definitely going to be reaching out to the landowners directly as part of the public outreach process. So there's a lot of that planned coming your way. Yep.
Great, thanks.
Christine Johnson, POSAC, when is that panel? I think that you mentioned, the panel.
April 30th, Tuesday?
Oh, my goodness, it's next week.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yep.
I hope that a lot of promo has been done for it because it should be excellent.
Town of Lyons put us on their newsletter. Yeah. Yep.
Susan, I have a few questions because it is in my backyard. I live on St. Vrain, so I cross this stretch a lot.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I think Janet really hit on the right point about how you start to involve people in this. When I was on the GOCO board, we did some visits with CDOT and GOCO to wildlife crossings and to areas that didn't have wildlife crossings. It was hugely instructive. As Drew mentioned, there are places where you're walking the highway, seeing carcasses of animals that you can tell have been multiple years, right? And those tours for landowners and for the public are incredibly helpful. They're incredibly impactful. So I'd encourage you to think about that.
Okay.
Along with GOCO funding, I'm curious, I didn't hear any mention of that. And they have funded wildlife crossings in the past. CDOT, GOCO, CPW have been the biggest kind of funders of wildlife crossings here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I would
But
encourage
GOCO,
you.
this is a good point.
Yeah, I'd encourage you to do that. I wasn't clear when the decision time is for the infrastructure grants.
Oh,
So you're applying sometime in July or August. It sounded like monies might be available in '27, but when is the decision made about who gets funded?
you stumped me.
Okay.
Our grant coordinator who's involved in this would know the answer to that. I'm sorry, I can get back to you on that.
That'd be
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there are plenty of people in Boulder County to advocate
Yeah.
on behalf of the grants, whether that's Representative Nagoose or Senator Hickenlooper Bennett. I mean, there are plenty of people that can also put a word in.
Yes, these are good points, and we need letters of support when we apply.
Hey, Tony, can you
Good
hear me?
points. Oh,
We do have Deanne Lambert, our
Oh,
grant
Deanne's
coordinator,
here.
on call.
Good.
And she can
Thanks,
possibly answer your
Deanne.
question. Go ahead,
Oh,
Deanne.
great. Thank you, Nick.
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
We can.
Okay. My name is Deanne Lambert. I am the grant coordinator for Parks and Open Space, and I've been working with Susan on looking at the funding. And specifically, this is through the Highway or Federal Highway Administration. And basically the $350 million needs to be spent between 2022 and 2026. In that, not spent, but You apply and
Appropriated.
are identified, you're awarded. So if we apply in July or August, depending upon when the notice of funding opportunity is released, then we will know within the year whether or not we have been awarded. The issue then becomes getting it finalized as through the federal channels. And the word is escaping me now, where it's promised into perpetuity. So if we were awarded a $20 million grant, we would know by 2027, or we would know how much, and then in 2027, we would be awarded or guaranteed into perpetuity that we would have this money. And it's a congressional, I'm sorry, the name is escaping me, appropriation.
Right.
It would be appropriated so that we can start spending it in 2027. And the 2027, I believe, is the approximate time it typically takes to get the approvals that are needed. So it's a broad about 3 years is what I've been hearing from the Federal Highway Administration.
Thank you.
Yeah, and what Deanne mentioned there, it never sunsets, this money, which is very interesting and excellent. So that's good.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I'll bring up one last point, which I think goes back to Paula's of seeing a moose tangled in wire. I've seen several elk tangled in the fences right on 36, right at St. Vrain Road. And some of those have not survived. There have been people coming out to help take care of those animals, but I do worry, per Trace's comment, that as we increase the number of large ungulates moving across to the east side, there has to be a coordinated effort with private landowners around fencing and around access to those properties. And it is going to cause some consternation for folks who live along there, because there aren't many deer or elk on the east side. There are very few right now.
So a couple things there. We are working on removing the fences right in the very, the places where the elk cross most frequently. So definitely we're aware of that issue. We have the Red Hill Elk Management Plan, which involves periodic ground counts of the elk. We have collar data. We are looking at UAS data. So we've got drones flying, counting elk. So we know where they are. We know their movement patterns. And I will tell you, we know the numbers exactly of who's where. We're not keeping track of mule deer as closely, but definitely elk. So we got a good handle on that. Cool. And I don't think we're going to be increasing the numbers of elk. I don't know that you meant that. Maybe you mean well, it's going to be the same number of elk. We're going to continue our hunt program, by the way.
Right.
So we're still working on managing that aspect of all this. And we're working with Table Mountain very closely on, the elk like to camp out on Table Mountain. So, but also we know where they come off of Table Mountain. We know what fences they're tripping up or getting caught in there. So this is a big picture, holistic view of it. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Other questions? Janet?
Not so much a question, but I think were you asking or saying there's not many elk east of 36?
There are a lot more west of 36 than east of 36, depending on exactly where on the north-south corridor you are.
Yeah, because I know I've counted over
You
like
have a lot
250
where you are, yeah.
down on Nelson Road
Yeah.
east. Okay.
Yeah.
Up towards St. Vrain, there's not as many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me tell you that, right, we have resident elk, the Red Hill resident elk, so the ones that camp out all year, about 120. And then when the migratory segment comes in, we have about 350. So those are the numbers that we're keeping pretty consistent. We know that's what we're dealing with. So if that's helpful at all to know who's east, who's west, yeah. And let me just mention too, the reason that we're talking about the east side holistically is because we're seeing the movement pattern of our resident elk going all the way out to 119, so the diagonal highway. And they're getting hit on 119 now the last few years. And they're using the left-hand creek corridor for travel movement. So we're going to be looking at what can we do to mitigate that on 119 as well. So again, it's got to be a big picture planning and assessment. Yeah.
Great, thank you.